if thoughts bubble up, rather than allowing them to capture your attention, let those thoughts be in peripheral awareness, just as with sound. And as you are totally engaged only with tactile sensations, settle the body in its natural state, which is a state of relaxed ease, stillness, and alert, vigilant attention. With each exhalation, release and relax ever more deeply, as if with an inaudible sigh. Releasing not only physical tension, but mental tension, cares, concerns, demands. Just let them go on the exhalation. And as you continue to deepen your relaxation with each exhalation, balance that with clarity. Don't give into the habitual association of drowsiness or lethargy with deep relaxation. Maintain a brilliantly clear mind that is simultaneously deeply relaxed. Then you can expand your awareness again to the room and bring that balance of relaxation and clarity along with you. Hi, welcome.
So sorry we couldn't find our parking lot.
1 hour of wandering, hopelessly wandering.
Oh gosh.
And walk right by it all the way down.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm glad that you're here. You almost made it on time. That was
Only 55 minutes late.
Do you need a chair as well, Minnie?
Yeah, I probably get, I want to take a chair.
Oh, I think that there are plenty. I think there are more chairs behind this door as well.
Very sorry to disturb you.
Oh, that's all right. We're actually just getting started.
Oh, you're just so kind.
So thanks for making the trip down. We have people coming from the far north and the far south, meeting in the middle here, and a few locals also. This weekend, we are going to be working at answering this question from a number of different angles. It's a question that has been central to my investigation of Buddhism, meditation, study of consciousness, cognitive science for at least 20 years, in fact. And that is the question with the shorthand, my shorthand, Why this now? So why is this thing appearing at this moment? And so we're going to be approaching this from a number of different angles. From some, you bring in a little bit of contemporary neuroscience and cognitive science, and also 2,500-year-old texts and teachings of the Buddha. And then Eva will take us into a deep dive of exploring Jason Kaba's explanations of that. And because what we're really going to be investigating is causality. What are the causes of this appearance right now? And when we are thinking about causality, I think in the West in the contemporary global economy around the world, it is very natural for us to think of science as having the ultimate word on causality. And so, for instance, it was very interesting to listen to a friendly debate between Alan Wallace, who was representing the Buddhist approach to understanding reality. And he was in a friendly debate in San Francisco with a well-known cosmologist from Caltech, Sean Carroll. And it was very interesting to hear Sean Carroll's explanation of what is reality. And he said very simply that it exists in a number of different layers. And so that the reality that is revealed to investigation is going to depend on what layer that you're looking at. And he said, with great confidence, that we know physics knows a great deal about many of these layers, from cosmology, the big layer, all the way down to the subatomic world of subatomic particles and the Higgs boson now. And he said with great confidence that really we have all the explanations that explain what's going on in this room right now. As far as physics goes anyway, as far as matter goes. But he admitted readily that physics isn't really going to be able to explain the politics in this room, which he admitted were very surprising and unpredictable. Human interrelationships, all of these things that really are the world of our experience. So interesting that if we're talking about what is causing my experience in this particular moment, that physics really isn't going to be able to explain that, even though he, in the later part of the discussion, said that that's all that there is physical explanations to understanding the mind and our experience. Everything is a matter of matter and physicalism. But that anyway, at least the current explanations aren't capable of understanding or explaining or predicting why this now. And so you could say that ever since Aristotle, that the world of Western science has taken an outside-in approach to explaining and answering this question, why this now, and explaining causality. And so the outside-in approach supposes and has a goal that there is an objective reality out there, and pure objectivism is the idea and the stated assumption and goal. And so what you want to do is to remove the bias of the observer as much as possible. So this is, as Thomas Nagel, the philosopher, said, the view from nowhere. Other places, it's called a God's eye view. So what is the truth of the world when nobody is looking, only God is looking. Remove humans, remove subjectivity as much as possible so that you can get to the truth of answering this question, why this now? With physical explanations. And so this approach over the 2,500 years or so that it has been employed has produced extraordinary mathematics, extraordinary physical explanations of the world, and extraordinary technology. And it could, to a lot of observers, it seems like it has produced unending progress. And so, for instance, medical science has improved our lifespans dramatically. So, we're living roughly twice as long as Tibetans were living in the 1950s. Dramatic improvements because of answering this question, why is this disease showing up now, for instance? But it's very interesting that something that I just saw a couple of days ago actually was taking a broader look in epidemiology, and it said that actually the rate of new diseases showing up has quadrupled since the 1980s. And that, or in the last 60 years, and since the 1980s, the rate of outbreaks of devastating disease has tripled. So the rate, somehow we are understanding why this now, but somehow disease might be resistant to that. And with new pathogens that are showing up that seem to be resistant to even our most effective antibiotics, also very worrisome. So in the world also of mental disease, it seems like we may be headed in the wrong direction. So with all of the understanding of psychology, neurology, cognitive science, why is it that rates of depression have become epidemic? And why is it that suicide has become the single greatest cause of death in many age groups now? And that's even before you combine, as I think it is perfectly reasonable to do, to combine unintentional overdose as a self-inflicted death too. When you combine those two, there's no comparison. So suicide kills more people than auto accidents in this country now. And there's no protection from it by age, even Dharma. I just found out that a friend of mine who had been studying with for a number of years killed himself. It happens. And so what is it? Somehow our approach to understanding our environment and especially our subjective experience has not been helping us to be happier and necessarily healthier. So in the Buddhist approach to answering this question, why this now, there takes several different avenues of investigation. The one that I am going to focus on is, you could say, rather than the inside-out approach, what is the view of your experience? This is an oxymoron. What is the truth of your experience when no one is looking? The God's eye view of your experience. And that's would be the approach of behaviorism, So that was the investigative goal, the black box of consciousness. So take consciousness out and then of the equation, and then explore human behavior. Well, Buddhism and the approach that I'm going to be delving into, you could say, is the inside-out approach. So really, the question there is, how do you explain why this now, or answer that question, why this now, based on the truth of your own experience? And so in order to do that, and so this has been the approach of shamatha, and you could say shamatha and vipassana, and the fusion of shamatha and vipassana in the Buddhist tradition. First of all, be very clear about the truth of your own experience, and then begin to examine it. So both of these approaches, the inside-out approach and the outside-in approach, are limited. You have either the brilliant technology, mathematics, and theoretical sciences of physicalism, but it leaves you out entirely. And the inside-out approach also didn't produce in Tibet or in Buddhist cosmology an explanation of quasars, for instance, or a more accurate description of the solar system. But what it, or brilliant mathematical theory so much. But what it did produce with this inside-out approach was a step-by-step approach to freeing yourself from suffering entirely and to providing liberation from suffering in the world of your experience. So when we are taking this inside-out approach, then it is very important to be able to get accurate information about the truth of our experience. So introspection becomes our scientific tool. And introspection was in the origins of Western or American psychology. This was intended to be by William James as the foundation of psychology. And unfortunately, at the time that James was working and theorizing and teaching, the techniques of introspection and meditation that were so well developed with shamatha traditions in the Hindu and Buddhist cultures of the East were simply unknown to him. And so introspection in the early part of the 20th century was attempted as a foundation for Western psychology. And then because it was just too subjective and there was no way of getting veridical information that people could compare the results because they didn't have a way of developing the introspective tool, they basically was disregarded, and then behaviorism just kind of took over the whole approach to understanding mind. So the way that, if we are going to take this inside-out approach to understanding the truth of our own experience, we are going to have to develop our introspective skills so that we can get noise-free, reliable data. And if we are able to do that, then we essentially are going to develop the contemplative lens, as Alan terms it. We're going to develop the contemplative lens, and then we are going to use that lens in the same way that Galileo put together these 30 power lenses in a tube, and then was able to use that instrument to get very interesting information about the moons of Venus and the transect, so that he could then basically, with developing the tool of observation, he was able then to turn that observational instrument out to do science. So we first of all are going to work on developing our observational tool with shamatha practice. And over the course of this weekend, I will be leading a progression of shamatha practice that begins with the most elementary that we were introduced to in that first 6-minute meditation, and then begin to use the stable, vivid attention and then still awareness to observe more and more subtle objects. And then as we have these objects in view, then we will begin to ask some questions while we have these increasingly subtle objects in our view of our shamatha lens. So this approach to understanding or to developing this contemplative lens, the introspective skill, reminds me of a hiking trip that I took in the North Cascades on one of my last visits there a few years ago. I lived for 25 years in the North Cascades, was a mountaineering guide, and I knew about, say 6 million acres like the back of my hand, and had some great companions there. And one of my great companions that I did long ski trips with and many hikes and climbing trips with is named Dana Vasali, and he is an extraordinary naturalist as well as being a good outdoorsman. And I'm not a naturalist. And so on one particular trip, he invited me to come along up to the top of Sawtooth Ridge in order to look for a very rare flower, the only instance of this flower west of Idaho. And so we got up to the top of Sawtooth Ridge, and at the top of this extraordinary ridge, there was a view for probably 150 miles to the south, all the way to Mount Rainier. You could see 360-degree panorama, snowy peaks, and this is one of the things that I just love about the North Cascades. When you get up to a high spot there, you can't see out of the mountains. It's just a sea of peaks in all directions. It's like being in the Himalayas. And so we got up to the top of Sawtooth Ridge, and I was just mesmerized by the grand view and was identifying peaks. You know, I was a lookout at one time too, and so I knew drainages and how this drainage was in front of that peak and how that connected to another drainage around there. So I was just creating this big mental map of the terrain, where we were in it, and on and on and on, all these peaks out there. And David had said, no, this isn't the reason that we came here. Look down there. And he had brought these hand lenses for the entire group, these 5-power loops. And so we had to get down on our bellies with these 5-power loops in order to look at this spotted saxifrage. And it was only then, with the power of the magnifying power of this lens and our commitment to get down on our bellies in the dirt in order to look at these things, that this whole extraordinary world was revealed to me that had been absent to me when I was just looking at kind of the mesmerizing world out there of the big peaks. So this is exactly what we are going to be doing. All weekend long, I am going to be leading us through these exercises of getting down on our bellies with our hand lenses and looking at these elements of our experience, one after another, beginning with the easiest to find under our hand lens. And then we are going to choose more and more subtle and challenging elements of our experience to look at with this lens. And as we have these items in our view with this lens, then we are going to do some science. Basically, the science meaning we're going to ask some questions about the elements of our experience that we have such a clear comprehension of. So the first thing then to do, we're going to work for a bit on polishing and grinding that lens. So we're going to do a shamatha skill practice here. And the essential thing, first of all, to realize about developing this contemplative lens of shamatha is that relaxation is paramount. And frankly, this was one of the most important early things that I learned in the presentation of Alan Wallace from him, was that you're not going to be able to make any progress in developing stable, vivid attention if, first of all, you're not operating from a base of deep relaxation. And so that is not a gimme, as they say in golf, right? Simply because you are lying down or sitting, it doesn't, in a meditation posture, it doesn't mean that you're going to be relaxed. And I noticed that just being in New York for 4 days now, that there is something in the air here that is hyperactivity and hyperstimulation, right? I mean, you just can't, it's very, very difficult to escape it, I think. It comes through the walls. It comes through the floor. You know, it's very, very difficult to find the kind of solitude and quiet that I have come to take for granted on Cape Ann up in Massachusetts, for instance. It's just, it makes, to me, it makes a difference. So, but it's not up there, it's the same thing, sort of. We're dealing with the same issues in that you can, up there, you may have more choice about it because, you know, it's just not kind of inundating you. But it's in our contemporary culture, we have with our hyper media connection, the whole goal of people with their devices seems to be arousal, 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 constant stimulation. And so and so that is the opposite of relaxation, or could be. So I saw this when I was going to the airport, actually. And because I am a cheapskate, I parked at the cheapest off-site parking outside of Logan Airport. And the reason that it was $5 a day cheaper than all the other spots was because of you could see that their staff was totally inept and underpaid. And the whole system was cheap. And so they didn't have very many shuttles. Traffic had been really bad getting to the airport. Luckily, I had left with plenty of time, so I wasn't stressed. But there were plenty of people who were parking at this place who were stressed. And you could see them looking at their watches and saying, when is the next shuttle going to leave? My flight leaves in 15 minutes. And they'd already been there a half hour and still no shuttle. And so one woman I saw got out her smartphone, and it was very interesting, the synchronicity of this, because I had just been listening on National Public Radio, an interview on my drive in to the airport with a woman who was talking, had done research on compulsive use of media, and what underlies her supposition about what underlies people's compulsive use of smartphones and constantly checking social media and email, etc., but the constant connection. And her common sense observation, but researched, was basically there's an underlying anxiety that people are trying to escape with the distraction of checking their device. And so I saw this at the parking lot. There was a woman who I had been commiserating with, who was looking at a watch and saying, my flight is in 15 minutes, my flight is in 5 minutes. She implored the driver, can't we take off now? And he said, no, we have to wait for the other driver to get back, whatever. And finally, she just had a meltdown and took out her phone and started playing a game. It was all about sorting colored dots or something. And that was her way of relieving the stress. So this is the world, contemporary world that we live in. And if we don't establish the base of relaxation first, we shouldn't be surprised. And frankly, over the course of, 4 or 5 years now of teaching this approach, I have run into a lot of old colleagues who have been meditating for a long time and who talk to me and say that they really haven't made much progress on shamatha in all of the time, many years that they have been meditating. And frankly, I think that a large part of it is that they never learned this at the very beginning, that relaxation is the fundamental skill that you need to learn. And then, of course, that's not sufficient, however. Because what we need to do is to develop this anomalous form of attention right away that is both simultaneously relaxed and brilliantly clear. So normally in our day, we are arousing, and it could be that the only time that we allow ourselves to relax is when our heads hit the pillow. And so we have this natural association of relaxation and, oh, it's time to get drowsy now and fall asleep. Please, Lord, put me out as quickly as possible because I have to get up in 6 hours and do this again. And so if we are meditating and we get deeply relaxed, it could be that laxity, drowsiness, lethargy, torpor, stupor, that whole spectrum, snoring, is our natural response to relaxation. So we need to, first of all, develop a base of relaxation, and then to balance that with clarity. So maintain a brilliantly clear mind while we are becoming more and more relaxed. And essentially, these are the qualities of a well-studied phenomenon now in positive psychology called flow. So these are the essentials. It's basically deep relaxation and clarity. And there are a couple of other elements to that also, like no self-concept intruding in our performance, etc. But so we are going to get deeply relaxed. We are going to maintain relaxation and clarity. And then Alan emphasizes that only then do you begin to concern yourself with stability, meaning that when it is appropriate, you begin to deal with stable attention. And when is it appropriate? It is appropriate when you can begin to concern yourself with stability without losing your relaxation and clarity. So if you're uptight, if demanding stability makes you uptight and you lose your relaxation, that is as inappropriate as a mother with an 18-month-old infant and the infant is crying, and the mother says, "Stop that. Don't you know that if you start crying every time that you're hungry or tired, you're never going to amount to anything in this life?" That would be absolutely insane, wouldn't it? But that's kind of what we do demand of our minds as well. So when we can add stability, then meaning that it is, we can do that without losing our relaxation and clarity, then we begin to concern ourselves with stability. So let's just do another meditation now that begins to just work more on grinding and polishing that contemplative lens. And really what we are doing, what is the one thing that really interferes with our getting clean, clear data about the truth of our experience? It's the obsessive, compulsive, delusive mental chatter that is our constant companion, the ruminating mind. And so what we are attempting to do at the very beginning of our meditation is to break the flow of the ruminating mind so that we can begin to then get information about our experience, focused on our attention, focused on only the physical. And so the basic premise here that has been well developed in the 2,500 year or 3,000 years of shamatha practice, and is corroborated by neuroscience, is that the default wandering mind of mental chatter can't be operating at the same time that we are focused on physical senses. So we begin to focus our attention on the physical, 5 physical senses. And so you know that the metaphor of monkey mind. And so with monkey mind, the monkey is living inside a cube that is suspended in space, and there's a window in each one of the walls. And he can only look through one of these windows at a time. So 6 walls, because there are 6 senses, 6 sense powers, 6 sense consciousnesses in Buddhism, rather than just the 5 physical. There's also mental consciousness. And so the monkey can only be looking through one of these at a time. And in order to bring relaxation, to begin to lower the level of turbulence of that monkey bouncing around ricocheting, we aren't going to put him on a leash and nail the leash to one wall and say, look only out that window right now. But we're going to let him ricochet around and kind of exhaust himself, but say, it's okay, I'm giving you permission to look ricochet through 5 of these, but not the mental. So only the 5 physical. Why is that? Because to the degree that you are focused, giving your attention only to the physical, the mental can't operate. So the ruminating mind goes quiet to the degree that you are able to maintain your attention focused only on the 5 physical senses. You will remain in the present moment. And then we are going to ask a little bit more as the turbulence of that monkey mind begins to subside, as it begins to exhaust himself. Then we begin to just say, narrow the scope now of your attention to only now sound and tactile sensations. Now only to tactile sensations. And then we begin to give a real target by now narrow the scope of your attention progressively only to tactile sensations of the breath. And then just one last thing here before we launch into this meditation. The Buddha authorized 4 asana positions in which to meditate. And so and you could say that these 4 positions are arrayed on a continuum. From here, the supporting relaxation on this end of the continuum to supporting clarity on this end of the continuum. And this also, frankly, is for people who learn to meditate in other traditions. This is, I think, liberating and breakthrough advice. That one of the most relaxed position in which to meditate is Shavasana. And that actually is why we have yoga mats out. And so for 20 years of my, first 20 years of my meditation experience, I was lectured, never try to meditate in Shavasana because you're training yourself to dullness. Well, in this approach, you actually, because developing relaxation is absolutely paramount to developing stable attention, not only is it okay to meditate in Shavasana, but you need to. You need to learn how to meditate in Shavasana without becoming dull and drowsy. So by kind of challenging yourself to meditate in Shavasana, you are developing very quickly this balance of relaxation and clarity that is so essential to developing attention that is both stable and clear. So you have on this end of the continuum, the most relaxed asana to meditate in is Shavasana. And then you have the seated position, either on a chair or on a cushion. And it is, more people start snoring in Shavasana than start snoring when they're in seated meditation, because it demands more clarity, a little muscular activity, Uddiyana Bandha, to keep your spine erect. So that helps to support clarity. But it's not uncommon, especially at the beginning of retreats, to see people whose head starts bobbing, when even in seated position, and they're just battling drowsiness. So if that's the case, then it makes sense to choose an asana position that supports clarity even more than the seated position, and that is standing position. And this one actually is extremely, I think, important, and especially during retreats, when you might be doing 16 to 18, 20 gatakas in a day, and drowsiness becomes an issue for you. So I have seen many, many times that people who are just habitually drowsy in seated position stand up and they report that this was a breakthrough. This was the most clarity that I've ever had in a meditation. And then the fourth asana position is walking meditation. So it's very unlikely that you're going to fall asleep, either in standing position, I haven't seen it yet, or walking meditation. So we're not going to get into walking meditation during this weekend. I'm not anyway. And but the first three, how is it that you choose which position to meditate in? Well, you just do a self-assessment. What does my attention need right now? So if your mind is distracted and has lots of energy, meaning surplus energy, because it's like so much energy that your attention is fragmented and flying on, then choose Shavasana, the most relaxed position to meditate in. And if your attention is drowsy, if you're already yawning, then it makes sense to choose a position that supports clarity more. So either seated position, or it could be even standing position. So find the appropriate comfortable position for a 6 to 12 minute meditation. Begin your session by breaking the flow of that ruminating chatter that is our constant companion throughout the day. And if you don't deliberately take this step, it'll just be 6 minutes of ruminating mind, not meditating. So you break the flow of the ruminating mind by intentionally narrowing the scope in which this monkey mind romps only to the 5 physical senses. And if your eyes are closed and there's no food in front of you, it will largely be reports of tactile sensations and sound that are coming in. Give your full attention to those 2 domains. And now intentionally narrow the scope of your attention once again only to the domain of tactile sensations. So sound now remains in peripheral awareness. There's no way that you can suppress sound, but you can just let it be. Let it be in peripheral awareness, without it capturing your attention, which is focused only on tactile sensations. So we are developing a very anomalous mind here that is both aware and focused attention. Awareness and focused attention simultaneously. Sound can actually be your ally because it can be instructive on the relationship that you can have with disturbing thoughts or intrusive thoughts that bubble up. Just like sound, let thoughts that bubble up that would like you to go off into the future or the past, let them, like sound, remain in peripheral awareness, where they can be without them capturing your attention. And now intentionally narrow the scope of your attention again only to tactile sensations of the breath, wherever these occur in the body. These are simply sensations that change as the breath enters and leaves. You can use the breath to deepen your relaxation. If you notice any tension or any pain in your body, allow your breath to be drawn to it as if magnetically, and then release the tension or pain on the exhalation, allowing it to just leave. Deepening your relaxation with each exhalation. And as you deepen your relaxation with each exhalation, maintain a brilliant clarity of your mind. And now, if it's appropriate to add stability, without losing your relaxation, give your attention a target. Now narrow the scope again of your attention only to tactile sensations of the breath at the abdomen. And notice that coarse movement associated with the breath entering and leaving your body. The key to developing stability is the exhalation. I wager that you will never lose your object on the inhalation. Because the exhalation, when you are relaxing and releasing your attention, that ruminating mind can slip into the slightest vacuum. So remain engaged with the tactile sensations of the breath all the way through the full course of the exhalation, where you will discover a pause at the end. And allow the weight of the atmosphere to just fill your lungs again with the inhalation, and you will discover a pause at the end of that also. In that pause after the inhalation, without using any words, simply affirm your intention to remain engaged with the tactile sensations of the exhalation all the way to the pause at the end. Inevitably, your attention is going to be shanghaied by a fantasy into the future or a memory into the past. When you discover that your mind has been distracted, let your reaction be what I call the 4 R's. First, release your grasp on the distracting object, and then rejoice. I am lucid again. This is it. Then return to your chosen object, the tactile sensations of the breath of the abdomen, and reaffirm your intention to remain engaged with those sensations all the way through the full course of the exhalation. The essence of developing stability is very simple. It is having the intention to remain focused only on tactile sensations of the breath, and then returning over and over again to your chosen object. Well, that was good timing. I wonder if I have an app on here for controlling that compressor. Is there a cause and effect relationship there? Well, in the half hour that remains, I would like to explore how it is that we combine the contemplative lens style in investigation of doing the contemplative science. So this is the fusion of shamatha and vipassana. This was the Buddha's great innovation in Indian philosophy, according to Allen. And because shamatha existed as a long tradition and was perfected at the time of the Buddha, and he had the best shamatha teacher in northern India, and he himself was a prodigy. But he realized that shamatha alone wasn't enough to transform your life, because when you came down from shamatha, which was essentially almost like a fix, your mental afflictions were still waiting for you to ambush you. So this is what Jason Kaba has to say in the Lamrim Chenmo about this fusion and why it is so essential actually to do both the contemplative science and to develop the contemplative lens. The mark of shamatha is that your attention stays right where it is, placed without distraction from the object of meditation. The mark of insight is that you know the reality of selflessness. If you engage in analysis with a wisdom possessed of shamatha, a state undisturbed by laxity or excitement, then you will understand the meaning of reality. So that's the promise. If you engage in the insight meditation with shamatha, the nature of reality is going to be open to you. And then Kamala Shila says in his second stages of meditation, points out why we need both of these. With bare insight that lacks shamatha, the yogi's mind is distracted by objects. Like an oil lamp in the wind, it will not be stable. For this reason, what sublime wisdom sees will not be very clear. Without such insight, however, so if you have insight without shamatha, your insights are going to be unstable. However, without such insight into the real nature, no matter how long you cultivate shamatha, you can only suppress manifest afflictions. You cannot eradicate their seeds. So this is, I think, goes right to the issue that a lot of people experience in their lives. And this is, why is my life transformed after an insight? Because frankly, I believe that it is not an uncommon thing to have great insights into, I think, extremely high insights, experiences of non-duality. People, I have talked to many, many people. This is something that they had in their childhood, in their teens, maybe once or twice on the cushion, but it's ephemeral. So it's, as Master Kamala Shila said, you have these flashes of insight, but as developmental psychologists would say, it is a state of consciousness. And what we are trying to do is to turn it into a stage of development or a trait. How does this become not just a peak experience that you have these flashes of insight and then spend the rest of your life grasping to, trying to somehow find your way back to those? But how do these just become your everyday experience of reality? How do they become traits rather than states? So the experimental paradigm, so that in order to do that, what you need to do is to develop that contemplative lens, get down on your belly in the mud, find whatever it is, investigate a particular object, And the experimental paradigm that we are going to be using for going through a progression of more and more subtle objects under our lens is something called the close applications of mindfulness. You find these in one of the in the Satipatthana Sutta, which is one of the seminal texts of the Theravadan tradition, and you also find in the Tibetan Kangyur. So in this, the Buddha proposed some hypotheses about the nature of our experience, and he then laid out some experimental paradigms and said, run these experiments and then check your results. And you can check your results. The reason that this is science, true science, is that you can check, basically run the same experiment and then check your results with those people who are doing the same experiment. And if you do that, you can come to some conclusions. And what the Buddha said was essentially, in order to know the nature of the mind, investigate the appearances to the mind. And so essentially that's what the approach that I'm going to be taking in this approach of the fusion of shamatha and vipassana. First of all of what's very interesting in the progression through in the Theravadan and the Pali approach to the Satipatthana Sutta, it's first of all that the first thing that you do is get clear comprehension, meaning that you get a very clear view of what it is that you're investigating. So that really is the role of shamatha. Because what is it that prevents the clear comprehension? It's just that chattering mind that is providing all of the noise in the data. Or it might be that you are, in fact, only observing your conceptual overlay of a phenomenon, for instance, a tactile sensation, rather than the tactile sensation itself. And so, first of all, we are basically, the Buddha is in the four applications of mindfulness, is laying out, first of all, a series of experiments that really are all of your experience, all of your human experience, that is broken up into four different categories that become more and more subtle. So the first of the categories that we're going to explore with the fusion of shamatha and vipassana, so this is going to be a lightning speed progression I'm going to take you through here over the course of the weekend to really just familiarize yourself with what does it feel like, this fusion of shamatha and vipassana, the basic approach. And so we're going to investigate, first of all, we're going to look at the coarse phenomena of tactile sensations, of atactile or tactile sensations, phenomena of tactile sensations. And then we're going to ask a very simple question of it. So the first, we're going to examine the way that the Buddha breaks down these all phenomena, basically, that you experience in your life. Your phenomenological experience is, he says, to make it systematic and easy enough to investigate, let's break it into four categories, four baskets of investigation. The first is the body. The second then is feelings, very interesting and powerful category of feelings. The third is the mind, and then the fourth is dharmas, or all phenomena. The interrelationship, how the body and the mind actually, what is the interrelationship, the dependently originated relationships between the body and the mind, and how that actually creates the world of my experience. And how does it create happiness and suffering in particular? So, when we talk about the body, you could really say that there are two elements to that. The body internally, which is essentially the body inside the boundary of my skin. A lot of us would say, well, what other body is there other than the body inside my skin? But I can remember probably in the year 2002 being out at Diamond Mountain. And who's that teacher from Australia again that came? Gosh, he and Sharon Gannon were teaching. They were talking about the five skandhas. And he was
Salim Lee.
Yeah, Salim Lee. So the wonderful teacher from Australia came and did a presentation before the quiet retreat Geshe Michael taught there. And he was teaching on the five skandhas, and he said something that was just shocking and revealing to me at the time. He said that the body is not only what exists inside my skin, but exactly in the same sense as the Buddha is talking about it here, the body exists not only internally, but externally, you can say also. So in this sense, then, the body is all of the physical world. Why is that? So the physical world, how does the physical world exist for me phenomenologically, meaning what is revealed through my perception? It is revealed, so the white of the wall in the back, how does that exist for me? It is revealed to me through the eyesight of, which is one of the sense powers of my body. So all of the physical world, essentially, you can think of as the body, part of the body external and the body internal. So the way that we investigate the body internal is going to be, is largely with tactile sensations, because we can't hear what's going on in my body, can't have direct sight of what's going on in my body. But phenomenologically, the way that we investigate the body internally is with tactile sensations. And the way that we investigate the body externally is largely with sight and sound, because that's the way that we navigate the body externally. But for now, we're going to begin our investigation of and experience of this fusion of shamatha and vipassana by examining tactile sensations. And then in this experimental paradigm of the Satipatthana Sutta, there are just three questions, three vipassana questions that we are asking. As we have phenomena under our lens, we ask only three questions of it. The first question that we ask is simply, is it permanent or impermanent? So that's what we're going to do. Because the Vipassana practice always implies asking a question. There is an inquiry. And so the simplest question, really, is simply to ask, are these tactile sensations, as I have them under my shamatha lens, are they simply permanent or impermanent? And Pabaka Rinpoche has some very excellent advice in the third volume of Ken Rinpoche's translation, which if any of you, frankly, don't have the 3 volumes of Pabaka Rinpoche's Lam Rim, translated by Ken Rinpoche and Art Engel, they have it out here for sale. And I would say, don't leave this weekend without, if you don't have those 3 volumes, don't leave this weekend without those 3 volumes, because it just is a continual mine of deep insights, and how you apply some really arcane, very deep, profound Buddhist principles and insights into meditation practice. So for instance, just going back to consult Pabaka Rinpoche again on this fusion of shamatha and vipassana, this is what he had to say there in the 3rd volume, which is in the shamatha section. He said, when you're doing this, because you're really beginning to do two things at once, which is, can you basically, what we're trying to do with our shamatha practice is, as we're going to go more and more into tomorrow, or I guess later this afternoon, is to develop simultaneous awareness and attention simultaneously. This is something that most of us just don't do. And in fact, a lot of neuroscientists would say that that's not possible. But meditators know that it is, at least by perhaps toggling so quickly that you are able to have stability in both of these, so that you could say that you're not losing the object. You're, as Geshe Michael would say, patching the gaps between in awareness and attention simultaneously. So you have these going on at the same time. And interesting things can happen when you're doing that. But this is Pabonka Rinpoche's advice about how you do shamatha and vipassana, how you have something under your lens and how you ask a question about it. He said, he uses the example of two people walking side by side down a road. And he says, each of them must keep an eye both on his companion and on the road. When you are examining an object with a vipassana question, I think I'm paraphrasing this slightly for clarity and relevance to what we're doing. The main part of your awareness must remain on the clear appearance of the object you are examining. So the main part of your awareness is the clear comprehension of what you are examining. You must use a different and subtler part of your awareness to pose the questions and examine it. And if this examining part of your mind is too strong, so if the vipassana part becomes too strong, it will destroy the intensity of your object under investigation, and it will either disappear completely, or at least it will lose its clarity. So it is important to exercise skill when you examine a phenomena, even as coarse as tactile sensations. So this is just golden advice. The fusion of shamatha and vipassana, the first, let the intense upfront part be the lens. You're examining the appearance, and don't let that dissolve or become distracted by what's going on in the subtler part. So it's as if you just had the questions in the back of your mind, and you're examining, what is the truth of my experience of this phenomena as I have it under my lens? And then you're able to draw some conclusions. But if you lose your view of your object under your lens, it becomes more of just an analytical meditation, frankly. So this is why what is really distinct about the fusion of shamatha and vipassana. You're inquiring about something directly in the moment of your experience. So, very briefly, we will do this meditation, but just so that you're not totally confused, in the Satipatthana Sutta and in yoga schools and Buddhism, it's said that they're tactile sensations. I think this is really, really precise. That there is a limited palette of tactile sensations, limited to only 4 sensations. And this is like the palette on your tongue, being only 5, and everything that you taste is just, the combinations of this basic palette. So the basic palette, what are called the elements of tactile sensations, are earth, water, fire, and air, emerging within the 5th element, space. So earth is simply solidity and firmness, boundary, edges. What is it that prevents my finger from going through my thigh right now? Water element is fluidity and wetness. And the fire element is this gradient of heat to cold. And then the air element is motion. And from the coarse motions of the rise and fall of your and expansion and contraction of your chest when you're breathing, and movement of your breath through the nostrils, for instance, to what is said to be subtle sensations of air element, which would be tingling, even an itch could be have motion in it. So essentially, your tactile sensations are like taste, in that most tactile sensations are going to be combinations of these four elements to form very distinctive and unique, more or less, sensations. So find a comfortable position, and then we will investigate. We will bring tactile sensations under our Charlotte lens and ask the simple question: are they permanent or impermanent? Spend a moment at the beginning of your meditation by fully engaging the sensory present. And now maintain your peripheral awareness as you narrow the scope of your attention only to tactile sensations, wherever they occur in the body. Let sound remain in the background in peripheral awareness, where you can easily be aware of it without it capturing your attention. You don't have to identify it. You don't have to tell a story about it. It's simply there. But your attention is focused on tactile sensations. And now narrow the scope of your attention to a single tactile sensation. Get on your belly and focus your lens on a tactile sensation. And simply inquire as you are looking at it. Is this sensation permanent or impermanent? Find now a particular instance of the earth element. Bring that under your lens. Just the tactile sensation of solidity and firmness. Could be where your body is contacting the floor or the weight of your hands. This particular sensation under your lens, how solid is it? Is it solid only on the surface, or is it solid all the way through? How large is it? Is the sensation stable, static, unchanging from moment to moment, or even as you are observing it? Is it dynamic, in flux? Perhaps morphing? Let these questions just be in the background, that subtler part of your mind, while you maintain most of your awareness focused only on the tactile sensation of solidity and firmness. Now shift your shamatha lens to a single experience of the water element, a tactile sensation of fluidity or wetness. And as you give most of your awareness to the sensation itself, simply observe it with the question in the background. How permanent is this? How stable? How constant? And now shift your shamatha lens to an instance of the fire element, a sensation of heat or cold. Give most of your awareness simply to bare attention without a conceptual overlay. But as this sensation is under your lens, simply observe it with the question, is it changing as I watch it? Now shift your shamatha lens to an expression of the air element, a sensation of motion, either coarse, like movement of your body with the breath, or a very subtle sensation of movement, like a tingling. Are these expressions of motion, are they constant or changing? does the magnitude of the heat or cold change as you are watching it? Can you observe any tactile sensation in the body that is not earth, water, fire, or air, or some combination of them? Simply let your attention now roam throughout the body where it will, noticing tactile sensations wherever they arise, and whichever sensation announces itself, simply examine it with a very simple question: is it changing or is it constant? Is it unchanging? What is the truth of your experience? It's easy to know the answer to the question conceptually, but does a conceptual answer have the power to transform your life? If you get this impermanence proven to you empirically with just the most basic element, your life can't continue with the same assumptions and premises. The simple implications: wherever there is meeting, there will be parting. Whatever is born will perish. Wherever there is ascent, there is descent. Wherever there is gain, there is loss. Just become inescapable to you. And you can use these basic understandings of impermanence that you prove to yourself with tactile sensations to develop an emotional balance. Because one of the scales, interesting scales of emotional style in the scheme of Richard Davidson, a neuroscientist who studies emotion, is the resilience scale. And one of the very fascinating conclusions of his research is that if you are basically your resilience with small things, meaning how fast do you recover from setbacks? How fast do you recover when things change in unexpected ways? Your resilience in small things, like the breaking of a teacup, is a very precise predictor of your resilience with big things, as in grief. So can you use essentially the impermanence of tactile sensations to, in a sense, prepare you for death? Is the question, or a question. It has, if you get it, and you actually do the investigation with a fusion of shamatha and vipassana so that it becomes an experiential realization, your life will change. So we'll take a 15-minute break now and come back at 11:30, and Eva will take us on an excursion.
Så jag skulle fått det där. Jag vill inte använda för att här är
What direction? I'm going. Yeah, she's we decided so I go to shows. Yeah, it's really good. Although it's not said until conviction. I will show how death everything else is just memory. One thing to do. Did her husband write it? Like, you can't go. Keep her just.
I know, I don't know. I should know. Oh, you just said it. But it was
Perfect for St. Patrick's Day.
But it was nice. It was really good. You know what I mean?
Why do you always wear black?
But it was.
Yeah.
I came into that. Very. Yeah. But I'd like to start seeing
But I heard Tony was
I think that's not. No, I'm always.
done anything with,
Well, the other thing that I'm trying to decide was.
Right, so I had 2 leads. And then
That should.
now called essentially after. So it's kind of like, I'm like 32 hours that it was confirmed. We just know college, our most recent one this Wednesday. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's,
Just, you know what?
Wait,
Wait,
did you hear the dinner?
No,
She's a nut.
I know, I even mentioned that.
Yeah. They're so.
I'm sure. Oh, yeah. Well, like, trying not to- You know what happened?
well, you're setting aside your travel prepares you well for
It does. I think that liberation itself is very
No, but I want to hear it.
No. Her decent job in New Jersey on Monday.
Yes,
Monday, I went to the street.
He put that down for you. And
you want to leave it there?
Oh, she's got some school. Yeah, it's like.
You go ask, you go ask.
I don't know.
So I get it, the little girl in green, that's where it comes down.
so you get the insurance.
I'm gonna put one up here anyway.
All right.
I have an idea.
So you get your own spot.
You know, it's, I'm driving my car.
He put that under the blankets for us.
But,
So the freedomness.
You know, it's.
Take it off.
Right.
No, it's very familiar, but I'm a little bit like it, but I'm afraid to go into like that. Where do you fit? You get started to be here, you get running like inspired. Like, but I'm also like. Yeah, like, oh, there's, all the people behind me can't walk, or there's somebody who's like, I have to run slow down. Or there's,
There's some people.
I feel like I'm gonna die and I'm gonna run through it.
Where you're running and slow, and you're underwater and you can't punch somebody like this. You try to run, you can't.
That's all the news.
Slow.
No, but I've had
So Doug, where do you stand?
yeah, it's like I feel my legs. Like the baton, I'm running the baton.
Angel's Rescue.
Yeah.
She has a place in Greek Point. Yeah.
Oh, the pre-war building. Way free. Yeah.
Oh,
right. Oh, my brother.
No, you're not.
Half hour run. See you.
Did it snow much up there?
Not as much as here, I don't think.
No, I don't know about here, but inland. Or inland. We didn't have much on the island, it was just a mess, it's a huge mess, so super mess. Actually, Palmyra was closed, and I didn't know until Diana sent me a picture. I said, are you okay? Your island's closed. I didn't even know.
So, yeah, I live in Portsmouth now, so,
It's really, I've always
we would
been.
call her the bullseye, and we would get there.
Yeah, it was really good. It was really, really happy.
We were back, and for your guys.
And it's better.
Nice to see you again. It's great to hear everything again.
Yeah.
Glad you do that.
Hey.
I'm gonna go by on that one.
It's a great thing to get here. It's a great practice.
No,
And you know, Eva, how we go.
Did you come in yesterday?
No, we can't.
Oh. And then the friend that's saying.
She was sure she's in New York again. She's
Things are a little bit.
Parking, there, ways, she's always like, I'm so happy. So when you came out early, did you have an exam?
Yeah, it was in North Carolina last week.
A lot of good things. Was it a change? Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun.
My brother's girlfriend.
We don't have to worry.
I would say technically it is technological.
Like, yeah, we don't have the-
Right, you're not saying.
I got
But you. Very close. I'm saying my brother's in Florida. Are you okay for now? Or error.
I'll bring it the next time.
Yeah.
We would have been here. We rented, I got it from the lot. Anyway, let's go.
Like, it's aggressive, but it's absolutely the question.
Not looking down.
Just a text.
If I'm looking up. You can hear me. Yeah, you can hear me there. I'm still planning to get up again for my straight.
Yeah, I think it's last night.
Oh, they're cutting like sales. Get your up there.
Yeah, I need to stand up.
Yeah, that's the part that makes it even more fun.
She's accurate.
I'm going to laugh.
I'm like,
Oh, yes, so I remember. Hi. Good to see you. It's a long time. I remember. It's a long time. It's a long time. I think we're all here, so as not to lose time, let's. So while we're fresh, I think we will actually start with a short meditation. But probably not Shavasana for now, so if you're set up sitting, that's good. So this wonderful advantage of short meditation sessions spread throughout a day enables it to become easier and easier to slip back into where you left off in your last meditation. So I invite you, even if you're in a different posture now than you were for the last meditation, to try to slip in as quickly as possible to the relaxation, grounded in these tactile sensations. Spread throughout your body. Again, allowing your peripheral awareness to take in sounds. You may become particularly aware of how the outer vibrations of sound may even affect the inner vibrations of the tactile sensations you're detecting from the inside. And then once you feel grounded again, in that ease, you can sharpen your awareness just a little bit, brightening the mind on the inhalation in particular. And releasing again in the exhalation. And then based in this ground of ease and mental clarity, we're going to use our magnifying glass, our sharpness of contemplative tool in quite a different way to ask questions that can't actually be answered by the tactile sensations themselves or by anything else in our immediate experience. But we will directly use the cognitive faculty, the thinking mind. And here the object of mindfulness, the object of concentration, will be the topic of the questions that I pose. But these will come much more to the forefront of your mind as something to quite directly think about. And so I ask you to look into your own life, your own past, and what the word karma means to you. You don't necessarily have to remember the first time you heard it or wondered what it was, but try to look at the arc of your own inquiry into causality. What makes things happen, when they do, why this now. And especially, I invite you to highlight those questions that feel most unanswered to you, most unsatisfied. And it may, because causality is so all-pervasive, it may be that these questions are your deepest questions about the spiritual path. What is it that makes the world the way it is, and how do my actions change the way the world will be for me and for others? And I invite you to join this very question. Each of us will have our own unanswered questions. But I invite you to join it to compassion. How is it that inquiry into what makes things the way they are, again, for ourselves and for those around us, how does that become the doorway to actually being able to help others? How does it become the doorway to understanding and then being able to penetrate the meaning of our own suffering? And so with both these questions and this motivation in our hearts, I invite you to call upon whatever form or idea of the omniscient teacher it is that comes to you. Whatever awareness, presence, knowledge it is that you trust most. Call upon that presence in your heart. And ask, with all the strength of your motivation, ask for help in understanding what you do not yet understand. And then relax. Return to that ease. And let your mind rest for just a moment. Not meditating on anything. And you can gradually open your eyes and open all your senses wide again. But without releasing that basic state of awareness, clarity, and ease. Let your default mode be one of taking in the present moment so that we may inquire into it, the totality of events, conditions, perceptions in the present moment with the same kind of clarity that we can bring to an investigation of tactile sensations. That was lovely. I was talking to bed. Why should I talk? We should put it So for those of you who don't know me, I am Eva. And it's such a privilege to be joining with Mr. Doug in this retreat. And just a tiny bit of background for where the things I'll be talking about today and tomorrow come from. I've actually had the privilege of spending the last year and a half translating and writing a dissertation on the works of Eva Natanya. And my own inquiry is driven very much by some of the questions I posed to you in this meditation. The dissertation itself ends up going into the philosophy of Tantra and Vajrayana, which we won't be doing this weekend. But at the root of the questions there are still the questions of causality, and in particular the questions of karma and dependent origination within samsara and beyond samsara. And I think this is a question, and I'm kind of assuming that everyone here has some significant background in Buddhism, or at least beginning background in Buddhism. Am I correct in that? No, it's good. That it can be very satisfying for some to hear this presentation on karma, that the things we experience are the results of our actions. And there's a similarity in cause in type between the things that we do and the things we will experience. The things we experience are somehow a reflection of things that we've done in the past. And then there can also be a great satisfaction in somehow believing that the path to Buddhahood, the path to enlightenment, the path to an experience of goodness that would go on forever, would somehow be caused by an activity of goodness that goes on forever. I mean, it's so simple in a way to put it that way. Okay, well, cause and effect. What I've done in the past produces what I experience now. So if I do good things now, that will produce, and I continue to do good things, and somewhere along the line I overcome this ignorance thing, then in perpetuity, goodness will be able to produce goodness. I'm deliberately simplifying, because I think for all of us at some point that's how the path might have looked. Please, you can do the way if you disagree. But then there can be difficulties with this. Both, and I think we've all run into this question of, well, if the things I experience are coming from my karma, what about the things the person next to me is experiencing which seem awfully similar to that? You know, this whole question of collective karma. And then questions like, why would my actions make somebody else with their own history and their own mind stream do something to me that's perfectly corroborated with my own karma? Like, how is my karma controlling somebody else? That's one I've had a lot of problems with. You know, we see it happen. We've had these experiences of that could not have been a coincidence. This person came into my life, this event happened, and I can actually, you know, if you're practicing long enough, you can start to see these echoes, these correlations of patterns of one's own actions, one's practice, especially if you're doing very deliberate purification practice or focusing on a certain meditation, you'll see it in your life. And you wonder, how is that affecting? How is what's in my mind affecting the actual people I meet who have their own lives and their own history and their infinite karmic mind stream? Does that question sound familiar? And then so that's one big one. There are a lot of sub-questions. But then another issue is when you look at the really traditional Buddhist scriptures, I won't go into the history of the word karma because that's its own thing. Very briefly, the root gur in Sanskrit means to do, to work, to make, has all those balances. But the earliest use of the word karma seems to be as in ritual action, as in the homa, fire pujas of ancient India. It's a ritual action so powerful that you can see its results. The word wasn't used for ordinary action. And then, of course, the Buddha in his teaching elaborated so greatly on the correlation between virtuous deeds and virtuous results, negative deeds and negative results. It's very clear in many scriptures, and particularly in the Tibetan Buddhist lineages, that a Buddha doesn't have karma. The whole path to Buddhahood is about putting an end to the, whether you call it the karmic storehouse or the beginningless past deeds that would bring their fruition. Somehow enlightenment means those deeds will never bring their fruition. But then there's the question of what is a Buddha's activity? And how is that different? And does a Buddha plant causes and receive results? Or is action in an enlightened realm of a totally different kind? And it is interesting that there is a Sanskrit word, Buddha karma, and that becomes the Tibetan word tinle. You've heard the name Tinli or Tinle. It's the word for enlightened activity. And part of that word is le, which is the same Tibetan word for karma, le, work. I mean, leka is your job. It's a very ordinary Tibetan word for work. Leka is somebody who does work. It's an employee. They use the same thing for le, action. So what I'm trying to point out is there's an ambiguity even in the language. You can speak of a Buddha karma, you can speak of Buddha action, but it's very clear from the details of the scriptures that the process is not the same, because a Buddha doesn't have habits. A Buddha doesn't have finite seeds that have to ripen into finite results. And yet, we speak of the collection of merit and the collection of wisdom, as though you have to amass all this stuff, all these actions, all these meditations, these countless meditations on emptiness, in order to have enough merit and enough wisdom to cross that threshold into Buddha. So I'm not going to answer that question today. I don't have an answer. But I want to raise them as questions. And what I've tried to do in my own research, and then I hope to just impart a fraction of what I've written about in these 2 days, to encourage you and help you to start thinking about the details, maybe beyond the teachings you've even received. Like I do, as Master Doug was saying, we have to trust our own ability to inquire and to receive our own answers. And sometimes, and I have found this, no matter how much one studies the scriptures, they won't answer the exact same question I had, or that we had, because the people in Tibet 500 years ago or 700 years ago had different questions than we do now. And so I see there's a balance between textual inquiry, scriptural inquiry, going to teachers you trust and believe in their own personal experience and their knowledge of the tradition, and then being able to go in and ask your own questions. And so the subtle difference here, and this is highlighted for me even just this morning, between vipassana or vipassana, that's just difference in language probably in Sanskrit, in the sense of the four close applications of mindfulness. That's a very specific practice, which is accepted by the whole Theravada, all the Theravada schools of Buddhism. It's in the Pali Canon. Where, and I hope I say this properly to do justice to what you just said, Doug, is you have a stillness, you have a shamatha, you have a stability with respect to what it is you're looking at, the object of mindfulness. And then you bring this other part of the mind, this other corner of the mind, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, and Jetso Kappa and many others, you take another corner of the mind to investigate. But you don't lose the thing that you're holding. But that corner of the mind is not going to go discursive on you. It shouldn't. At that point, when you're trying to join shamatha and vipassana, you don't want to disturb the waters. So your question is just loosely holding the question. And that's not typically the same as what we think of as analytical meditation. And anyone who studied the ACI courses knows all about analytical meditation. The way Pabonka Rinpoche talks about analytical meditation is you learn a whole series of presentations. You learn a lot of information. You listen to what the teachers have said. A lot of memorization is actually required to do successful analytical meditation, because you have to have your toolbox, as it were. Or you can open your drawer and you have all these ideas at your disposal. But then still, that analytical meditation, it's up to you to put them together again. And there's a debate element, an element of debating with yourself, of almost deliberately doubting the things you've been taught in an open-hearted, not a negative kind of way, but an open-hearted, really? Are you sure? And then testing that against your experience. But the way that they say experience in that instruction has a lot more to do with experience as transmitted by memory. So you're still using the conceptual mind that can look into your memories of your experience. And that's different from holding a single object in present moment shamatha meditation. Okay, what I'm saying, so shamatha meditation on something that's arising in the present moment, like tactile sensations, and then holding a question gently in relationship to it. As opposed to, you still have to reach this stable state of mind that's open, aware, present, has the three qualities of relaxation, clarity, and stability. So you're not literally going off on another topic. But your object of meditation in that case becomes the entire constellation of questions and relevant thoughts about your object of analysis. So I think it's important to highlight that difference, because we're actually going to be now alternating in our respective sessions between those two different types of meditation. And Jitsokapa himself addressed the objections to analytical meditation over and over again in his works, as you can see from the wonderful English translation of the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment. Is that 3-volume set of the Lamrim Chama. There's a whole section on why analysis is necessary with respect to emptiness meditation. And I just, because it came so strongly to my mind, I wanted to read to you. It's actually Jitsokapa quoting from what's known as the chapter requested by Kashyapa in the Ratnakuta Sutra. So this is a Mahayana Sutra, very, very famous. And it's something that Master Kamalashila quotes in one of his stages of meditation, the Bhavanakrama. And so then Jitsokapa repeats this analogy yet again to defend his point of why there's nothing wrong with using a conceptual mind in order eventually to reach the non-conceptuality that is the direct perception of emptiness. Because there were, of course, over and over again in the history of Tibet, the question came up, well, if your goal is to reach non-conceptual realization of emptiness, a non-dual realization of emptiness free of conceptuality, and cause and effect are similar, we just said that, I mean, we'll say it a lot, we'll deal with it a lot more, cause and effect are similar, then don't you have to do a meditation that's just like what your goal is? So that means you shouldn't use conceptuality in your meditation, right? We all know that that's not what this Gelug lineage accepts. But there were a lot of people saying, and I think in many respects, there are still teachers who would follow that logic now. They don't get all caught up with that conceptual stuff. It won't help you. No. And I am not knocking non-conceptuality, because of course we know the path has to lead to it. But in the tradition of Jitsokapa, I'll take his stance, which is to almost ridicule that opposite view and say, well then, why isn't the marmot going to reach perfect realization of emptiness? Why isn't the bear or any other kind of creature that we can imagine that maybe has a very non-discursive mind? I mean, then if discursive thought is caught up with language, and not having language is better than having language, then, all those sentient beings who don't use language are probably better off than we are. That would be an absurd concept. But I'll just read this quotation to you. Well, yes, this is from the shorter steps of the path to enlightenment, so what's known as the medium-length Lamrim. And it's the section on the unity of shamatha and vipassana. And actually for Jitsokapa, he's not teaching the close applications of mindfulness at that point. And for him, the union of shamatha and vipassana is a very, very specific thing that unless any of you have reached actual shamatha, none of us can do today. So for him, the actual union of stillness and insight, or shamatha and vipassana, requires reaching actual shamatha, because it has to do with the physiological changes that take place when one reaches actual shamatha. And I'm sure many of you have heard this explanation before, and I didn't prepare it, so I won't go into it now. But the shift in pranic energy, the complete balance of energies that takes place in the achievement of shamatha, then as he describes it, it's actually increased by your insight meditation. It's increased by your analytical analysis. So he also, and we're working in part from the same sources, so the whole notion of the oil lamp that's being blown by the wind, Jyotirkapa cites that as well from Kamalashila. So he says you have to reach that totally still oil lamp that can then illuminate the tanka. You'll see the totally clear picture. And he says if you do too much analysis, it'll disturb your stillness. If you do too much stillness meditation, then you'll actually, he says, get an aversion to doing analysis. It'll seem like a chore and like, oh, it's so messy. I want to go back to my stillness. And so he says you have to keep balancing them. But then he describes this place where you've reached, it's known as Xinjiang, or what's our latest translation of that? Agility, pliancy. Familiar term? Agility and pliancy, I think, the most common translations. But Xin means really pliant, really agile. And Xinzhuzhangwan actually means that all the propensities in one's body that make one averse to doing virtue have been released. And so your body and your mind are completely supple, pliant, and have no resistance to doing virtue as long as you want to. In this case, that's meditating as long as you want to. So that was one of those lovely plugs for shamatha. But my point was, for Jyotirkapa, you don't reach the true union of shamatha and vipassana until you have actual shamatha, you have the pliancy of shamatha, and then you apply that to the insight. And as he says, if you reach that point, then if you meditate on insight, it'll send you into the agility. It'll send you into the actual shamatha. And if you are doing shamatha meditation, well, yes, if you're doing shamatha, then you do the insight, it'll send you into a deeper shamatha than you had. So it's clear to me that Jyotirkapa's understanding of analytical meditation is something that could get very, very subtle, not just discursive thought. And yet, if you look at the kind of analyses that he gives throughout his writings, and from the beginning of the Lamrim Chomo and all these other things, he was willing to use very coarse concepts to get his points across. So I'd love you to try to think of it as this progression from coarse analysis that we can do right now, all the way up to a place where one's reached this sublime state of mental and physical stillness. And then the insight sends one deeper. And as he says, it's not just a combination of the two of them next to each other. That's the main point that he keeps referring to. It's not as if you've got your shamatha and then you alternate and do a bit of analysis and then you go back to your shamatha. By the time they're truly joined, the analysis increases the stillness, and the stillness increases the depth of the insight. That's what's going on there. And so fundamentally, this is just an expression of my own faith in the Buddha's teaching. I think that the quality of this may be extremely similar to what the Pali teachings on the union of samatha and vipassana in the 4 close applications of mindfulness would be about. When your stillness is so unshakable, and then you simply ask the question, and the truth arises, the insight, this penetrating wisdom arises from it. But along the way, I think that in Tsongkhapa's lineage in particular, you might be using a lot more coarse conceptual thought as your object of meditation. So here's the justification from. So Tsongkhapa says, in this case, you may think, if one meditates on suchness, that is reality, in order to give rise to non-conceptuality, then it follows that this state cannot arise from the individual conceptual analysis, since cause and effect must be similar in nature. On this point, the Blessed One, the Bhagavan himself, has spoken a clear answer. As it says in the chapter on Kashyapa, the 43rd chapter of the Ratnakuta Sutra, O Kashyapa, it is like this. If, for example, one were to take two sticks and rub them together with wind, then fire would spring up from them. Once the fire has come, the two sticks burn away. In the same way, O Kashyapa, if there is a perfect individual conceptual analysis, the power of an Arya's incisive wisdom will arise. When it has arisen, it burns away that perfect individual conceptual analysis itself. So Tsongkhapa's comment, that was all the sutra. It says, thus he states that the incisive wisdom of an Arya grows from the individual conceptual analysis. I'm adding the word conceptual there to a term that many of you may be familiar with as the individual analysis, so-so-thought. But I had to translate the word conceptual there because the whole point, in Tibetan at least, is so-so-thought is conceptuality, one by one. So the very definition of nirvana as it's the cessation that came because you conceptually analyze one by one the things that involve reaching incisive wisdom or prajna. And that is what enables you to put an end to mental afflictions and the obstacles to omniscience. Or, no, the mental affliction obstacles for nirvana. So that's its own topic, set aside. It has to do with method, really. Back to karma. I actually want to read you something else, which is from the Lamrim Chemo. And these are all my translations, so sorry if some of them sound unfamiliar or different style. For anyone who might wonder or doubt sometimes, because I'm sure it comes up, does everything really come from karma? I mean, we hear that, but really? Do the scriptures say that? Or is that just a simplification for us Westerners? And frankly, and this is a big question that came up for me, if one studies in a Theravada tradition, there are a lot of contemporary Theravada teachers, and I did some internet research on this, which actually kind of shocked me, who will emphasize that the Buddha taught several different types of causation. And some people have actually tried to use modern words for that. I'm not going to get into it. It was a big debate. I'm not going to get into it. But when I looked up what those 5 categories of causation actually were and the sutta they came from, they all came back to karma. It was really interesting. But for now, we're doing Tsongkapa. So I will read to you what he says in the Lamrim Chemo. Whether one is an ordinary or a highly realized being, every happiness in the form of a feeling of comfort, all the way down to the experience that arises for a being born in hell when a cool breeze stirs. Let's say, like, imagine the worst experience beyond what we can imagine. And yet there's the slightest shift in the fires of hell. So he'd said an ordinary or realized being. So we know, okay, Aryas, what kind of pleasure could an Arya experience? All the way down to this subtlest shift of relief in intense suffering arises from virtuous actions collected in the past. But a situation where happiness arises from non-virtuous action does not exist. Every suffering, in the form of a feeling of discomfort, even up to that, which comes in the mental stream of an arhat, someone who's put an end to their mental afflictions, arises from non-virtuous actions collected in the past. So even an arhat can experience suffering based on past karma. So they say, whether it's every pleasure down to that of the being suffering the most, or every pain up to the being who's already reached nirvana, arises from non-virtuous actions collected in the past. But a situation where suffering arises from virtuous action does not exist. Therefore, this is still Jitsokapa, no happiness or suffering could ever come without a cause, or else from a cause that was not congruent with it, such as from a primal force or a powerful lord, and so on. Thus, happiness and suffering in general come from virtue and non-virtue in general. And all the various specific instances of happiness and suffering come, one by one, without the slightest confusion, from specific instances of two types of actions. This is the certainty, or the infallibility, of action and its results. Finding certitude in this idea has been praised as the foundation of all pure white practice, and is known as the perfect view of all Buddhists. It's just, I love that it's so, how do I say? If you want to know what Jason Kappa thinks, he said what he thinks. A couple things to comment on. The notion of a cause that's not congruent with it. This is a phrase that comes up throughout Jason Kappa's writings, Tantra, non-Tantra, and so on. Tun means harmonious, congruent, gets along with it. And I think in the ACR courses, Geshe Michael often translated as a similar cause, which certainly is gets the meaning across. I could, again, as a scholar, there were times I had to be a little bit more literal in my translation, because sometimes it's described by the very word for similar, which is jawa. And so, Dumba, I like the notion of it being harmonious. Like when two people get along, that word is Dumba. So it doesn't mean the cause is exactly the same as the thing, as a result. It just means there's a compatibility, that's the other word. Compatible cause, congruent cause, harmonious cause. And so that's what he's saying. He rejects three things here. He says, no happiness or suffering could ever come, well, actually four things, could ever come without a cause. So there's no such thing as uncaused happiness or suffering. There's no happiness or suffering that could come from a cause that's not congruent with it. And then he enumerates that as two things, which you would be familiar with from ACI courses, a primal force, which is the pradana, I think that would specifically be in the Sankhya school, the notion of a primal matter or a primal force that then transforms into all the things of the world. I'm not going to go into that now. But that would be basically a non-mental cause. Or a powerful lord, which would be understood as a creator being who creates everything. And it's interesting to me that Jitsokapa identifies both those possibilities, which were believed by various Hindu schools, and with lots more variations and details thereupon within the Hindu schools, that either of those would be a non-congruent cause, i.e. another being who creates your happiness or another being who creates your suffering. The being is not congruent, is not the same as the happiness or suffering that you're getting. So it's just a very interesting way of even looking at the Buddhist relationship with the notion of a creator being. It's not that there's any problem with the notion of extremely sublime, powerful, omniscient, all-compassionate beings. We know that. That's the foundation of Buddhist thought. But the notion that a being like that, whether a benevolent being or somehow a malevolent being, could create your happiness and suffering, it's saying that's not a similar cause. Because a being is not the same as your happiness or suffering. I.e., happiness has to come from happiness arising in, as we know, another person's mind stream. Suffering has to arise from suffering arising in another person's mind stream. But this, as I indicated before, still leaves me with a lot of questions. He said happiness and suffering. He didn't say matter. He said happiness and suffering. He didn't say your mind stream. He said happiness and suffering. He didn't say your five heaps. I mean, actually, by the time I've said matter and by the time I've said mind stream, that pretty much does cover the five heaps. But you get my point that one reads that statement and sees, wow, so categorical. Everything comes from a cause similar to it and nothing doesn't. Oh, but he said happiness and suffering. But there are a lot of other things in the world than happiness and suffering. We're about to do feelings. We're about to get into how specific feeling is, as opposed to all the other phenomena. So, and I come from a Christian perspective in all my analysis of Buddhism. So those questions don't leave me. Okay, so where do the mental streams come from? Mind itself, is that being created? I mean, then that becomes that really annoying, beginningless question of mind stream came from mind stream, came from mind stream. But did virtue make a mind, and non-virtue made a lack of mind? But how can the lack of mind experience non-virtue? It gets, you see how if one doesn't get the sort of categories straight, you can get into some very gnarly questions. If you're saying virtue creates the experience of pleasure, but you can't say that virtue created my mind. What made my mind? And then you can say for some reason the image of a baseball hitting my head comes to mind. Well, if that's unpleasant for me, yes, that comes from a non-virtue action. But the hardness of the ball, and now you can start to tie this into tactile sensations. You feel something. Where does that come from? Why is that sensation arising now? Is that virtue or non-virtue? And does that have really anything to do with it at this point? You know, if you're in a present moment meditation on the impermanence of a tactile sensation, what does virtue or non-virtue have to do with that? I'm playing devil's advocate because I actually am going to come around to something maybe unexpected. But I'm just throwing this out because we need, as I said, we need to ask our questions. And I don't expect you to have the same answers I've come to, and I don't expect to have the same answers a year from now that I do now. So what I'm trying to say is, where did the baseball come from? If the fact it arose as unpleasant comes from me having hit somebody in the past. But what about the hardness? Is hardness virtue or non-virtue?
Neutral.
Neutral, right? Great. Yeah. And that is a karmic category, actually. Morally unspecified, morally neutral. But that wasn't what Jetsa Kappa was referring to there. So then we have that other question of, well, yeah, what about all the neutral things? Do they come from neutral karma? I'm trying to get you all confused, sorry. And then this is a very, in a way, a Western existential question. Both Judeo-Christian Islamic philosophy has asked this question in various ways, but also secular philosophy. What is the cause for the existence of anything at all? Why is there anything at all? I mean, that comes almost, from a Buddhist point of view, that would seem to come back to the question of why are there mind streams at all that can mess up so badly? Who made those? Who made those? All right, I have a couple more gnarly questions, and then I'll start on a presentation. But while I'm at it. And some of these I've already touched on. How can my past actions force someone else to do something to me in the present if it's only my own mind that stored the imprint? I expressed that already. Or then this question has actually come up quite vividly. It may be cosmic justice. You know, we've heard the analogy, well, it's some kind of cosmic justice. It's a cosmic law. Oh, who made that law and who's keeping track? Because then if one uses analogies, you get stuck in the analogy. And we're right back to the book of life, the book of good and evil. And then this big question, is karma only intention? And I'll come back to that and what word intention translates and why I actually think that it's not the best translation, at least not the way that Jetsokapa understands it, because it's more raw than intention. So if you say karma is intention, as the Buddha says in some Pali, well, there's one famous quotation from Pali Sutta where the Buddha says, monks, karma is intention, I tell you. But then if one says, oh, karma is only what you brought to it, what you wanted to do. It's only your motivation. That's not what intention means. And so that's a point I want to plant the seed. We'll come back to shortly. But still, this question has run around for us. Is karma only what I wanted to do, regardless of how it turned out? Do I only get the results of what I intended, even if it went bad? And then in turn, is it only a matter of how we react to what happens to us? Something really nasty may happen, but if I react with good intentions, does that mean I've planted good karma? And in turn, will that create the things that happen to me, or only the way I will react to them? I.e., will they see, this is yet another distinction, will they appear as pleasant or unpleasant to me, or will I then label them and act upon them as being pleasant or unpleasant? You start to see all those, and we'll do more of this in meditations weekend, all those layers of possibility between the way something appears and the way I react to it. But is that all that karma means? Again, is it just a matter of training oneself to react differently? And then this big question, does karma actually determine our life circumstances, such as illness, economic status, relationships, and so forth? Or is it only about the feelings that arise in response to our situation, creating habits for future response? Is karma only about patterns of behavior and the tendency for how we're going to view the world? Or is it a question of some all-pervasive force that is anonymously creating every detail of our lives? And I almost am making a psychological distinction there, in the way that any contemporary psychologist would say, yes, of course, we're totally habituated. We have all these patterns, we have all these ways of reacting. That's all karma is. It's a very easy way to secularize Buddhism. And I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying we have to question, is it accurate? Is it what the tradition has intended? If it's only patterns in that, I almost want to say surface psychological sense, and I would actually include the deep unconscious and surface in what I'm saying right now, because I mean the psychology that we have as opposed to matter, this very strange divorce that we have in our modern thinking between the psychological life and the real concrete world life. And so the baseball is the concrete world. My psychology is whether I spend the next 50 years feeling depressed because of what happened in that situation when I was a kid, right? To divorce things that way. So the question I'm asking, is karma only at the psychological level? Or is it somehow creating the baseball? Is it somehow creating the hardness, the whiteness, the motile force, the person who hit it, the person who threw it? And that's where we've all gotten really uncomfortable with karma, I hope, at some point. It should be uncomfortable. It shouldn't, I mean, I think it would be very dangerous if we took a teaching on karma and then started assuming, well, it's just my deeds that made everything. And wow, that's really depressing, actually. That's really depressing. If I'm thinking of me in a self-existent way, and I'm thinking of my deeds in a self-existent way, and seeing a world in a self-existent way, and then trying to add a teaching about karma to all those things that I've locked onto in a concrete way, that's not a karma that will lead to emptiness. I won't dare to say that. Unless one deconstructs it a lot more. And that's what we're trying to, at least I'm trying to do here. Then the question of determinism. Well, if karma's if it is making every detail of my experience, and if my experience extends to the concrete things in my world, as in the physical world, does that mean everything is just deterministically planted by the past, and then where's freedom? Where's the ability to change? Where's the ability to travel on a path? Then we have the big solipsism problem, which we've already gotten the edge of. And then if everything's coming from karma, does that mean everything's coming from my karma? Does that mean everything's coming from me? That means I made you all. That means when I die, the whole universe disappears. No. I assure you, no.
Darn.
Is the notion of karmic causation a kind of demythologized theological justice? So, and I think a lot of us have at a certain point tried to take it that way of, well, we understand somewhere along the line, we understood this notion of an all-powerful being who is meting out reward and punishment, which has its, I mean, as I expressed to you, I'm Catholic, I'm coming from that background and I bow down to that. But from this perspective, interpreted in a very subtle way, with a good deal of figurative thinking going on. But on the other hand, if one took a very literal reading of divine reward and punishment, and then carried that over to our understanding of karma, then again, it's that who keeps track, because you're already thinking of karma as though someone has to keep track and mete it out. And I warn us, as non-Tibetans, as not having been thoroughly raised within and I'm being specific to a Tibetan Buddhist culture, because I know that even the teachings in karma have differed between different lineages of Buddhism in Asia. But not having been raised in that way of thinking, to bring an external judgment idea onto the teachings of karma is, again, I think, to get snared. And back to the cold-hearted law of nature kind of view. You know, if you demythologize theological justice, take out the element of a divine, benevolent creator, and then are just left with the cold-hearted law of nature on the same model as we've been doing physics for the last 600 years. You know, we hear law of nature. There's a whole history of the word law of nature. So then if you start to think of karma as a law of nature, and then you bring all the objective research of physics, again, nothing wrong with it, but it has its own pedigree. To think about karma as something out there that was made apart from us, problematic. And then leaving the impression of a universe fragmented into billions of individual causal chains that are like a mechanical toolbox. Quite, again, depressing. And one wonders, how could a universe that's working that way ever lead to the bliss of Buddhahood? And I think, to me, that's the crux of the question, because I know I'm filtering everything I'm saying here with things that work for me or don't work for me. I'm sorry. There's no way of even giving a presentation without some element of agenda. So sorry about that. But if one says everything comes from karma in our world, even if one adds, and ignorance, it still, to me, begs the question of how could enlightenment towards all objects, which is one way of saying what a Buddha is, who is omniscient towards all objects, totally pure vision towards things as they are. If one's already got a view of this fragmented causal chain, almost karma materialized approach, I think it's very hard to bridge the gap between, oh, Buddhism's like this, karma, its results, beginnings, past lives, pointless turnings in samsara. And then to try to have a mystical spiritual vision of Buddhahood and infinite compassion and the qualities that I think many of us, if we are coming from a theistic background or an attraction to the mystical vision, many of the great spiritual traditions, and then to somehow bridge that with a teaching that's trying to say, well, even the world in its messed up state is somehow so divorced from unity is actually the word I want to say. The notion of whether there's one universe or countless universes, the notion that reality at some level is united. And we know from the advanced teachings on Buddhism, that's exactly what it says. Yes, reality is united, not one and a self-existent one, but there is such a thing as a wisdom that can see all objects. So that means at some level there's an access to all things from one place. It's the way the notion of a Buddha is expressed. But if one has gone off, and I am saying off the deep end, off in the wrong direction, and even understanding karma as the most basic teaching of Buddhism, I'd suggest that there are big gaps that become harder and harder for us to bridge. So coming back to Jitsokapa, the question that, as I say, has really been deep within me and that I'm posing to you now is, especially in the ACI lineage, we've heard of this marriage of karma and emptiness, inseparability of karma and emptiness. Even to the explanation of the emptiness of a thing. Obviously, there are many ways to explain the emptiness of a thing, and that's not exactly what I'm talking about now, so I'll do it quickly. But the emptiness of a thing as the fact it didn't come from my karma. Is that phrase familiar to anyone? The emptiness of the pen, not just being the fact it doesn't have a nature of its own, but the fact it's not a pen from its own side. Those are very, very traditional Tibetan ways. I mean, those are direct translation of Tibetan phrases. But to say the emptiness of the pen is the fact it didn't come from my giving pens to someone in the past. Now, that's an extremely clear teaching. And it's an extremely powerful teaching for being able to plant karmic seeds and see how the things that arise in our lives could be correlated with our own actions. But the doubt was sort of planted in me a while ago. Have you ever seen that in Tibetan? Have you ever seen that statement in Tibetan? And I didn't know enough at the time to be able to give an answer one way or another, but I actually knew I hadn't, because once you do, then you remember it. So I wanted to go about a search. Say, does Jitsokapa ever marry karma and emptiness that categorically? So we've just had the clear statement, that's why I started with that no happiness or suffering comes from anything but virtue or non-virtue. But we've just established, I think, that there are a lot of other factors in the world, there are a lot of other phenomena in the world than just happiness or suffering. And if one equates the emptiness of a thing with the fact it didn't come from karma, then one is implying karma creates every single detail. That is the reverse implication of that worldview. Karma, as in action, as in virtues, non-virtues, or morally neutral action, creates every detail. But then does that mean that the totality of things that are empty equals the set of the totality of things that are created from karma? I know I went fast in the logic there, but I hope it's sort of clear. So the next question I needed to ask was, are karma and dependent origination equivalent sets? Because it is very clear in the three principal paths. We've all seen the little book of principal teachings of Buddhism. In the last few verses of that, Tsongkhapa makes explicitly clear in several different ways that one's view of emptiness is only complete when it is inseparable from one's view of dependent origination, the infallibility of dependent arising. He uses actually, and I only noticed this in studying those verses with this question in mind, he uses the word infallible about 4 or 5 times, almost every verse in that sequence. But he uses a different phrase with it. So earlier when he's talking about developing renunciation, he says, think over and over of the infallible relationship between karma and its effects. That would be yunde lume. Then he says, suppose you see infallible cause and effect of every existing thing, whether of the suffering cycle or beyond. So there he's clearly talking about a cause and effect that reaches beyond samsara to nirvana. And so that immediately plants the question in my head, does that include karma anymore? And then he refers to consider the infallible dependent relationship or reliance and relationship of appearances. So then he's talking about noa and things that show up as the opposite of emptiness. And so he then says, infallible reliance and relationship of appearances and the sheer absence, which is emptiness. And he says, as long as your understanding of these two ideas show up one by one, you still have not realized the true thought of the able one. And so then one day they will no longer alternate, but in a single instant, the very fact of seeing infallible reliance and relationship alone, that's how I'm translating dependent relationship, because they're actually 2 different words. Dependent origination is used in slightly different way than dependent relationship. And it's just important to notice they're not quite the same thing, Tendel and Tendrung. So I wanted to point that out, that's why I'm translating it that way. But back to the verse. One day they will no longer alternate, but in a single instant, the very fact of seeing infallible reliance and relationship alone will dissolve the confident apprehension with which you were holding to objects. Then your analysis of the view is complete. So that's as clear as Tsongkhapa can get in saying your understanding of dependent origination and emptiness are inseparable. They must be inseparable. My question is, and he even says that when you understand how emptiness dawns in cause and effect, then you'll never be stolen off by extreme views. My question is, when he said infallible karma and its effects back in the section on renunciation, is it the same set? Set theory. Is there karma and its effects? But karma being only one kind of cause, and then there's cause and effect. And then even cause and effect being a subset of dependent relationship, because a mental designation and an object it's questionable. You can bring up a debate as to whether that's a cause and effect relationship or whether that's a relationship of identity. If you've done, of course, ACI 13, there's the relationship of identity, and 2 things are the same thing, but they're being labeled in different ways, or there's a cause and effect relationship. So you can have dependent relationship, which isn't strictly speaking cause and effect. So you see how when you get deeper into a text like that, you start to notice these things of, wait, they sound like it's sort of synonymous each time he refers to cause and effect, dependent relationship, karma and its results. But is he always referring to the same thing? And so when at the end, he categorically says that emptiness is inseparable from dependent relationship, and he says that emptiness dawns in cause and effect, does he always mean karma? So I'm wondering whether to do it one more meditation or say more. Let's do another meditation. Be about exactly 12 minutes. So try as you find your posture to connect as quickly as possible to tactile sensations this time. And try to notice how the mental activity of what we've been thinking about might have changed the way that tactile sensations are arising in your body even from an hour ago. Just note the difference. And this time, don't worry about your breath so much. Try to pick up on other flows of energy that may not be correlated with breath, but are still moving through your body. Just lightly scan from your head to the tips of your toes. And see if you can locate other currents. And then very gently bring your attention to the area of your heart, not in a tightly focused way, just very gently toward your own energetic center. You might note the rising and falling of your rib cage. And then fall a little bit back from there toward your spine. It's good to become accustomed to doing analytical meditation with your mind located in your heart, so you don't associate analysis with head. It needn't be. And just be present with the astounding fact of the experience of your body right now. Why is there able to be such an experience at all? And try for a little while to release all concept of your body. And just be this flow of vibrations. And then go back to the mental picture you have of your body sitting there. What you think someone else would see. And note the difference between those two images. And then try to release the conception again and go back to the sensations. And then ask yourself, if these sensations are impermanent, to whatever degree you've seen that, how can one moment of sensations lead to the next? What is the space of awareness in which those sensations arise? And is the continuity of that awareness the same continuity as the continuity of the sensations, or is it a different continuity? Do you have a sense of awareness itself being caused? Moment to moment? Or is it just there? And then consider for a moment how you think of the presence of other awarenesses in the room. Let your mind spread to your conception of the room and the beings here. What does it mean to you to think of the multiplicity of minds? You have experience kind of similar to yours. Could there be a deeper level at which all those minds are interacting in a web? That some part of your deeper mind can see. Could your mind know, or in that sense record, interactions that your conscious mind is not aware of? And could there be a level of causality that is deeper than perceptions? Let your awareness spread more broadly and consider the whole planet as an entity, as a unified system. However that conceptual image arises, don't worry. We all have our conceptual images of the planet. But what kind of mind would it take to be able to see a whole planet arising from causes within your mind? How big would your mind have to be? And then come back to this room. Is there any border between your mind and that of those around you? And what would that mean? Then come back to the sensations of vibrations, tactile sensations within your body. And consider for a moment if you could somehow measure all action as vibration, whether it be the waves and shapes of mind and all its creativity, the very obvious vibrations of speech, or the physical vibrations of matter, so evident to you right now. What if you could see karma as these waves of vibration? Would it be any easier to conceive of the vast web of interactions. And then relax again. Let your mind rest. And come back to a clear, vivid presence in the room. And we'll go out to lunch now, or whatever you need for sustenance. And I encourage you, obviously if you go out, it's New York, you'll need to use speech, but I encourage you to keep a retreat atmosphere, to keep a retreat mode, especially in the common room here. Let's keep real silence in this room, so if people want to be quiet, they can really be quiet. And very specifically, I encourage you to keep this tactile awareness. That's our theme for the morning. But try to just watch what is action. As you pray for the food, as you eat the food, maybe you have a conversation out in the street. Do whatever you need, but watch action. Both as you perceive it in your body, embodied action, and as you think about it, how do you conceive of what you're doing, moment by moment. So this is a wonderful opportunity, just like, okay, I'm going to take an hour just to look at this. What is action? I'd almost say don't worry about motivation too much. Just watch the doing and how that's interacting with your mind. So combined with all that we both said, I don't want to say. You can forget everything I said and just take Mr. Tug's teaching with you to lunch. But I hope it could be a way of integrating and sitting with this, sitting, walking, eating with this question of what is karma in an experiential sense. So that's what I want to take it back to is, yeah, all these crazy conceptual questions, but in the end is the only answer we're going to find is, what am I doing? And what impact is that having on my mind and body, minute to minute to minute? And we'll pick up with more ways that the scriptures and the masters of the past have thought about that later this afternoon. So should we say 2:05? Sure. So please come back at 2:05. Have a blessed lunch.
What's the closest place to the Cape Cod?
There is